I graduated to the bedside where as an ICU and critical care nurse, I started having technology conversations. And from there, ended up being on the whiteboards and the conference tables around technology conversations to my most recent role, which is at Singularity University. So Singularity University is a really special place. It is the place where what we do is we empower, we educate, and we inspire leaders to use exponential technologies in solving humanity's grand challenges. One of the things that we ask our participants is, how are you going to improve the lives and positively impact 10 billion people at a time? I get to work with Daniel Kraft in producing a conference called Exponential Medicine. And this is a really interesting program that is not designed for sissies. It is 4 days, it is immersive, it is intense. And what we do is we bring to the conversation all of the different technologies that are looking at low-cost genome sequencing, 3D printing, nanotechnologies, robotics, virtual reality. We've heard a lot about virtual health. How do you bring that into the surgical space? How do we create virtual classrooms? And what we do is we focus also on looking at marrying that to crowdsourced enablers. So when we were just talking about these very difficult and esoteric diagnoses, what happens when you engage the entire crowd in being your physician who's helping to figure out what your diagnosis is and what your treatment should be? So as I mentioned, we focus on these technologies, and I was just going to give you a quick, what I refer to is that it's like Disneyland for clever optimists. And this is our picture this year taken by a drone of all of the folks that are there. And so we get to have an awful lot of fun. I work at both ends of the spectrum. I work with very large enterprises that are trying to figure out how to maintain their relevancy and their saliency in the marketplace. And I also work down on the other spectrum with researchers and startups in helping them to bring their breakthroughs and their novel and fresh thinking into the marketplace. So with both ends of those, I am swimming in all sorts of technology conversations. And I will tell you, it is fascinating. It is exciting, and there is a groundswell of technology that's coming on board. And what happens is that when people come and participate in our programs, and I will tell you, I truly work with the smartest people on the planet, and they are doing good things for the right reasons. And that it's really inspiring. And so when our participants come, the first thing that they walk away with is this sense of optimism and hope and excitement. But they come to us and they say, I have no idea how to start this technology conversation within my organizations. I see that these are really promising technologies, and I'm sure that these are the things that we should be doing. But I just don't even know where to begin with those conversations. So what I wanted to do is share with you, I have a really interesting perch to think about these things. And what I wanted to do is swim outside the lanes of healthcare and talk about what I refer to as the tale of missing persons, dire warnings, and perverse incentives. So some things are meant to go together. When you think about chocolate and peanut butter, you think about spaghetti and meatballs and cereal and milk. Those things just seem like they should work. You know, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups has been really successful. Chef Boyardee, I mean, you may not like the SpaghettiOs, but boy, did they sell an awful lot. So that was kind of the situation with Kellogg's, with their breakfast mates. They had this idea that if you put cereal in a small cup and put it with a spoon and put it with milk, this would be a parent's dream. Their kids waking up early, they can independently take care of all of their eating, and everything is good. It would be a great on-the-go breakfast solution. What they found when they released it into the wild is actually it wasn't convenient to open. Kids couldn't get it done. And can you imagine eating breakfast cereal in your car? Kids would have milk all over the place, cereal all over the place. Like, this was not working. And then to top it off, if you got it open and you didn't spill it all over, people found out, you know what, I don't really like warm milk with my cereal. Drake University, they decided that they needed to have a killer recruiting campaign. So they were trying to figure out, how do we talk to people about our special program and what happens when you put the Drake experience plus a student. And they came up with this campaign, D+, and put their students on the campus in those t-shirts and sent the students who were interviewing at the school home to talk to their parents about, I think I want to go to Drake University. So as you can imagine, once they unleashed this, the Drake University officials were having to try to explain why they thought that the D+ campaign was a really brilliant way to reach their target audience. So it makes you wonder who their target audience is. And they talked about, that it was intentionally edgy. So when you start with a new business endeavor, what you might want to do, bare minimum is you do a little bit of brand research. Actually, if you don't mind keeping the lights up, I really like being able to see your faces, if that's okay with the video, the audio. So anyway, you would do just a little bit of basic research to find out who's showing up in the marketplace, how they're showing up in the marketplace, how they're talking about their competition. Well, these two Indian entrepreneurs, that basic advice completely escaped them. And when they decided that they were going to open up this clothing store, and they were inspired to name it after the nickname that was given to their very hard-working grandfather, who was known for his strict demeanor. As you can imagine, the Hitler clothing boutique did not go, it went over like a pregnant pole vaulter with the Jewish community in India, and actually the rest of the world community kind of felt the same way. So, let's see if we can get this. Keeping kids from experimenting with drugs is no easy task. And the New York agency that works with at-risk youth, they found that getting that message out to them was also really hard, because all of a sudden when a 10-year-old started sharpening the pencil, come on, too cool to do drugs. And then all of a sudden, cool to do drugs, and then just do drugs. So as you can imagine, they were a little bit embarrassed. They had to recall those pencils, and then they reprinted them the other way so that the first thing that was sharpened off was drugs. You can imagine with this particular, there's a very small market for the Santa dreidel. So what do all of these things have in common? Other than being a little bit embarrassing, the important thing is that they make you laugh, and then they have you ask this question, what's missing? How could this possibly go wrong? And this is what I refer to as the missing persons phenomenon. Too often in a project, when we're having a technology conversation, we haven't invited the right people into that conversation. Or if we do we invite them in at the right time? Maybe they've been invited in too late. So I want you to think about, when your own technology conversations, who it is that you have sitting at your table. So, and I'm actually going to read some of this to you because when I was thinking about how to describe some of these things to you, I really wanted to make sure and capture a couple of really key phrases, because we have technology rushing into every part of health, sick, and death care. And I really want to make a specific delineation between each of those, because they really are different, but they are absolutely integrated. And so when you think about the teams that you're assembling to have these technology conversations across all of that, it's because healthcare is so complex and fragmented and regulated, and all of those things that we've heard so beautifully illustrated, it's really easy to be unaware, not just forget to invite somebody, but to be completely unaware of who should be in those technology conversations. And the thing is that oversights can lead to really big problems, and that those big problems include painful deployments. How many of you remember healthcare.gov? Painful, 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 painful. And I don't know if most of you know the story, the backstory about how that got resolved. But it was by inviting the U.S. Digital Service in 6 people. That was it. 6 really rock star technology specialists from a range of disciplines. They were the ones that came in, and in about a week really got things turned around. So it was a function of having the right people, at that point in time, not having the right people in that conversation. So when you don't, you have really painful deployments, you have very slow adoption rates, and then there are missed opportunities. And then the other thing is, what happens when a process or a product fails or there's a mishap? And those things are devastating, absolutely devastating. And when you think about some of our most innovative, and I say innovative, by innovative what I mean is that they've been successful, harm reduction measures and standards of care, when you think about why do we have pulse ox monitoring in an OR, why do we have fetal heart rate monitoring, why do we have labeling about allergies, it's usually because there's been a product or a process failure, and it leads us to come up with a better solution. So What I get really excited about are those conversations when I see nurses designing with engineers, and I see cardiologists coding with programmers, and you see patients working with architects and fashion designers. And you bring these really interesting musicians working with all of the folks that are in the pharmacy. You see data scientists coming in. We've talked a lot about data. I think one of the other things is when you see social workers who are working with social media strategists. What are the possibilities of integrating and having really interesting conversations? And I will tell you, that is where the magic happens. And those are some of the most wonderful conversations. And the reason why they end up with better solutions is because they have this really broad range of use cases. So all of those things, you know, that question that you ask, what could possibly go wrong? By broadening those perspectives that are there, you come up with this really wonderful, robust range of use case scenarios. And that is how we develop our very best solutions that are the most likely to endure the really difficult things that come through. So you have made sure that you have invited the most interesting cast of characters to your conversation. Now that you've got that and it's unusual and it's broad enough, what could possibly derail these interesting conversations and interesting minds? Dire warnings. Whoops, let's go back. That was way. Dire warnings. Okay, so when your language, the language that you're speaking in your conversation, when it is filled with a lot of do nots that are written in all caps and punctuated with tons of exclamation points and all sorts of menacing tones in the language, like who wants to swim at that beach? Does it even look safe? This language of, in the innovation economy, we have this language that is really focused on failure. And that really works well when we talk about failing fast, failing forward, failing smart. That works incredibly well if you're trying to design a breakfast taco or a music discovery service or a social connection app. But when you're talking about patient safety, that language just really does not resonate at all. And when we have the expectation of perfect care, and that's a reasonable expectation, and it is possible for us to deliver that, that language of failing just does not resonate really well. So when you think about, but because those scenarios are so painful for us to think about, that is why we default back to this language of dire warnings. And when you think about having all of that language of dire warnings, and you talk about do not do this, and the fear of failure, and all of the menacing language, you can imagine that that creates really unproductive and stifling innovation conversations. Seriously, it doesn't matter who you have at that conversation. Nobody wants to be a part of that. So when we have a language that's got blame shifting and fault finding, things just stop progressing. But this whole concept of finger pointing and blame shifting, this is one of the reasons why people just do not want to be a part of those technology conversations. Let's see. So, if we're thinking about the language that we're going to speak, if taking that language of saying, let's run at failure, is not something that we're very comfortable with, if we're using the damning language that creates a bunch of silence, or we're creating that apathetic language with the shoulder shrug that just kind of says, you know, mistakes happen, we'll just deal with it. What language do we actually use so that we can surface a problem or even, an error? How do we talk to people about that? It's interesting, behavioral economists have spent an awful lot of time looking at what is the language of nudging to get people to do the things and shift their behavior because they want to do that. And I love this. The grass is smiling at you. Please detour. Like, who's going to walk on a smiling patch of grass? Just not going to happen. So when we think about that language that we're going to be using, we need to be thinking about changing people's behavior because they choose to do so. So this behavioral economist work, one of the things that they have been really successful in is looking at hand washing rates and reducing hospital infections. It's been put to really good use. So millions of patients across the world are infected and die from infections that are caused by the contaminated hands of healthcare workers. How do you get, there was a study that was published, and they looked at 20 hospitals with really successful hand hygiene programs. fascinating array of technologies that they used, high-tech and low-tech. So on the high-tech side, they had RFID monitors. There were new sanitation gels that were put together. They developed fabrics for scrubs that were pathogen-resistant. On the low-tech side, it was really simple stuff like where did you place the soap dispensers, making sure that they actually had people observing the hand washing and reporting all of that. And they married that to data collection, dashboarding, reporting back, setting goals, and developing scripts for patients and families and care workers and healthcare administrators that really encourage people to be hand washing. In one program, they used an acronym called CHAMPS. Clean hands are making patients safer. And with using this, all of these hand washing champs started surfacing, and with more champs came more ideas. The biggest challenge that they had was figuring out, how do we keep this campaign fresh? And what they found out is that the language that they used, the ones that were the goofiest, were the most memorable and by far the most effective. There was a neonatal intensive care unit in Alaska that just decided to post the number of days that they had gone without sepsis. And what they reported is that when they got to the 100-day mark, they felt a cultural shift. And when there was an infection reported, there was this audible groan of disappointment. In one hospital, they took something really low tech, like this little emblem, and they had it sewn on the front of patient gowns. And they married that with creating compliance cards that had that same emblem, and they would hand it to clinicians, complimenting them on their hand washing or noticing when they had missed an opportunity to do so. But by keeping the same logo on the front of that, they reduced the punitive nature of any of that. And what they reported is that staff really appreciated just be reminded of the values and the goals that the organization had. So what I'm trying to bring out here is that there is a language that we use that helps folks to promote the types of activities that we're looking for without penalizing them or putting these huge warnings that prevent people from doing really important things. And my point about that is that there is a way to mourn an error, to celebrate a discovery, and to really move forward a resolution, and that language is not mutually exclusive. So anyway, so now that we've got the right people at the table and we're speaking the right language, what's the next step in making sure that we have really rock star quality technology decision conversations? And that is removing perverse incentives. So there is a long list of perverse incentives, and when we turn the mirror on healthcare, boy, can we find them. So I'm just curious, like I have my favorite, pet peeves about all of that stuff, and one of my business partners, we'll be working on a project and he'll give me a call and ask me about how things are going, and I'll start going on my frustration about it, and he said, excuse me, I think I misdialed. It seems like I got dial-a-rant, because sometimes that's what it sounds like. So anyway, when I was, as a young mom, I think all parents do, they're trying to figure out what are the best ways to educate our kids. And I, like all parents, I was reading everything. I would reach out to my peer network. I visited every possible school and did exhaustive amounts of research thinking, this kid, boy, they really need me to make the right decision about that. And I was reading this book called The Schools Our Children Deserve by Alfie Kohn. And after all of this exhaustive research, in the back of the book, there was a 2-page graph. And it was a chart, not a graph, a chart. And it had a column that had elements that you would look for in a classroom. And it had really simple things like what's up on the walls, how are the chairs and the tables organized, where is the teacher standing, what happens when a visitor walks into the classroom. Really simple things that anybody could evaluate. But what I loved were the 2 columns that he had as far as evaluating, and he had it good signs and possible reasons to worry. And so from that, I was trying to think of how do I help folks who are thinking about having these technology conversations when they're making really big, important decisions. What is that really simple way for teams to know and organizations to know that they're on the right track of making really good, building teams that are going to have robust technology conversations? So I came up kind of with my own. So in your technology conversation, the first thing you want to ask is who's at the table. And if you look around and what you see is that it's stacked with attorneys and accountants and risk managers and consultants and even worse, politicians, ooh, you need to start worrying, okay? But if you look around and you see nurses and artists and fashion designers and game designers and coders and data scientists and pharmacists, and you see all of these folks coming together to share their perspective in the continuum of care, this is a really good sign. If you listen to those conversations when you've got all those people together and you hear things like, ooh, we can't do that. Oh man, we would get in so much trouble. Oh my gosh, that's against the rule. Oh my God, my boss would never go for that. Instead, what if you hear people in that conversation, what if? Why not? Or why? Asking really good questions. Or they use this term, yes and. Not yes, but. That's the idea stopper. Yes, and. Or they ask, well, let's find a way. You know, this is so important and it's mission critical. This is why we are here. This is what we do. I laugh all the time when I talk with my earliest years in the clinical environment, started out in the emergency department. And I absolutely laugh when I would hear attorneys say, oh, we can't do that, we can't do that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, talk to the hand. If I said that every time somebody walked into my emergency department, I didn't work in just any emergency department. I worked at Grady. Okay, so they talk about if it could go wrong, it will happen 3 times a day walking in through your emergency department door. There was very little we didn't see there. So this idea of, you know, I can't do that because protocols or rules or it's too much risk, that's just not the way we operate. What is valued and what gets celebrated? So if you're working in groups where they're saying, you know, we're really looking at making sure we don't incur any fines. If we're looking at, we're making sure that we do not deviate from the protocol. You know, if those, not to say that those are bad things, but if that's what's driving your conversations and it's not about really good questions being asked, and it's not about effort and persistence and conviction and passion and creativity, and if you don't have patience involved in every single part of this process, your technology conversations just don't have the bling that they need to be really rock star conversations. So with that, what I would like to have happen is that this story of missing person, dire warnings, and perverse incentives, I'd like to change it to a new title. The Addams Family Detour Smiling Grass While Running with Joy at the Hardest Parts of the Problem. Thanks.